I usually never get to talk about like actual good things happening in the world, and I thought today I'm going to talk about something nice. All right? Something nice and neat, all right? All right. Here we go. Also, we've been going for 3 hours, technically 4 hours. If you're enjoying the show, hit the follow button over on Twitch, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, like the goddamn YouTube stream, and consider dropping those subs and donos. But my brain rot, there will be brain rot on a new day when I haven't been furiously angry for multiple hours prior to stream. All right, here we go. So, folks, one of the biggest problems on the planet, or at the very least in America, is the rising concerns around obesity and specifically some of the conditions that can arise, such as diabetes. My mom has diabetes. My dad has diabetes. It's not fun to watch a loved one deal with that. However, there have been, like, in the past week, multiple breakthroughs when it comes to like pretty revolutionary cutting edge science when it comes to diabetes that make me really hopeful for, the near future, right? For example, this is a news story from just today, right? Published in Semaphore. Doctors report pig kidney transplant success in US woman. So if you haven't heard about this, guys, basically scientists have been figuring out how to genetically modify pigs in order to basically grow human compatible kidneys that can then be like, transplanted into human beings who need organs. So she got to do a kidney from a cop. No. We're talking about the science. It didn't fail this time. It does not appear to have failed this time. So, what's really interesting about this, doctors revealed Tuesday that a 53-year-old US woman successfully received a kidney transplant from a genetically modified pig, becoming the only person in the world currently living with a pig organ, according to her medical team. Since the November surgery, the woman has lived for weeks without dialysis, an encouraging sign for future transplants using genetically modified pig organs. So one of the big things about this is that in the past, they have attempted this before. However, the recipients of these transplant organs typically, like, their bodies rejected the pig organ, and the transplant failed and they died. The fact that this transplant has gone through, the patient is beginning to heal up and no longer needs dialysis indicates the success, right? Which is very, very cool. It's very, very cool. And yeah, some scientists believe such procedures could save thousands of patients' lives. There are more than 100,000 people on organ transplant waiting lists in the US, according to official data. But their record has been mixed. Since 2022, there have been several transplants using pig organs across the world, but many of the patients died weeks or months after surgery. The doctors who worked with this pig kidney transplant patient told NPR that her youth and otherwise good health may make her a better candidate. However, the other aspect of this is that scientists have continued to genetically modify the pigs in order to make them more and more capable of interfacing, like make the organs more capable of interfacing with human physiology, right? Like, this would be a huge thing, you know? Like, I have loved ones waiting for organ transplants. And like BBBBB says, people always ask me about this, so getting ahead of it, lol. Totally totally kosher. For one, you aren't eating it, so kashrut rules don't apply. For two, saving a life supersedes a lot of rules, kashrut being one of them. Oh, I didn't know that. That's neat. But yeah, it's really, really cool. Now, this is not part of a clinical trial per se. This is more of like a proof of concept. So basically, if this success is shown to be like long-term successful as well, what that would open the door to is FDA trials. We would be able to have more scientific data on a larger segment of the population, and then that if those proved also successful, that would open the door to like mass, like this would become like one of the most life-saving surgical interventions and medical advances in modern history. This would be huge. This would save people like my mom and my dad. Like this, it's a really big deal, you know? And so that brings us to the other really big advancement, which is so cool. How do you feel about artificial wombs? I think they're really cool. I don't know a whole lot about them, but I do think that they're neat. I like the idea. This is exactly what I needed to hear tonight. Oh, Foxy Cheshire, it gets so much cooler. So there has been another scientific breakthrough in the treatment of diabetes that is so kind of groundbreaking that some people are calling it a cure. Some people are calling it like the first implementation of like nanobots or nano robotics in the human being, the human like physiology, like the first like way we can like actually put nanobots into human beings in a way that would function. I don't necessarily know that it's a cure for diabetes. However, it is a really big deal and it is pretty significant. So to maybe preface this a little bit more, there is a YouTuber named Dr. Ben Miles, who is in fact an actual doctor. And he had a tangential role in kind of helping to create this. And it's really, really neat. So we're not going to watch this whole video. It's about 20 minutes long, but we are going to watch this section about what exactly this is, right? So, get ready to hear some really cool science.
Special Agent Brixobenzomethamphetamine.
There is one significant problem with glucose. To a chemist, it looks a lot like fructose, or sucrose, or many other sugars. To an optical physicist like me, it looks kind of embarrassingly like water because of all the hydrogen bonds. It even kind of looks like paracetamol. That's a problem if we want to make a medicine that can respond to glucose levels in the blood supply. We don't want it accidentally triggering if someone has a headache. That's going to lead to a bad time and probably a lawsuit. It was with this challenge that our story starts at the chemistry department at the University of Bristol, the university I did my PhD at, in a group led by Professor Tony Davis, developing a class of chemistry called synthetic lectins. These are artificially designed proteins that mimic nature's ability to recognize and bind to specific carbohydrate structures, like glucose. The challenge in designing these molecules is to build something that binds to glucose and only glucose, not fructose or paracetamol, and that it binds tightly and quickly, but at some point it releases. Otherwise, it's essentially removing glucose from the blood supply. This is an unbelievably difficult chemical challenge, but after many years of research, some very primitive candidates were produced with approximately the right properties, leading to this Nature paper. And now I think it's worth noting here, after big breakthroughs like this, advancements often kind of go quiet, much to the internet commenters' annoyance. It's a video in itself, but in an overly short summary. This is because academic funding supports the development of breakthroughs, not then advancing those breakthroughs to the point when they are useful. Equally, you might say, well, this is surely where industry should step in. Maybe, but it rarely happens because these are
Yeah, like the one of the huge issues around actually advancing science and medical breakthroughs or medical science in general is largely because you need public sector funding in order to move the needle forward until, dipshit business degree folks see the potential for profits that isn't, like 5 to 10 years away. There needs to be that short-term return. Otherwise, capitalism is just blind to an issue.
These ideas are still very early, need a lot of work, and may still fail. We are lucky in that in Tony's lab was Harry, a PhD student who in 2015 thought to launch a startup to fill the gap of moving this breakthrough forward so it didn't end up just as a really cool PDF. Things went really well for Harry until a year later when he hired me as technical employee number 4 or 5 straight out of my PhD as head of engineering, which is reasonably easy when there's only 2 people in the engineering team. He tried to give me the title of lead engineer, but I proudly said, sorry, I'm a physicist. So my title became lead physicist, and immediately that backfired when people read my title on email and thought I was a lead physicist, as in studies lead. So there you go, there's some level of karmic justice for all the engineers out there. We had a pretty hard journey as a startup. We realized there wasn't any wet lab space in Bristol for startups, so we ended up building our own building. Our engineering team was incredibly distractible and ended up building an electric skateboard controlled by a laptop. My theory here was that if we got it working, you could commute and do work at the same time. It ended reasonably badly. Luckily, the chemistry team was some of the best in the world and turned the chemistry from only possible if the stars aligned to something about 1,000,000 times better than anything produced by mankind or nature before. A system that bound and released glucose and only glucose. But there's an obvious question here that we've been skirting around, which is, that's not a medicine. How do you actually make it useful? To answer that question, we need to look at the current medicines that are being used, the hormone insulin that diabetics inject to regulate their sugar levels. If you look at insulin, you notice that it has a long, thick region in the middle, and then these 2 long, spindly arms that sort of float and flow, like a gentle version of those inflatable guys outside of gas stations. If these arms of insulin are...
By the way, I was unfamiliar with this guy's channel before I was shown this video. Thank you to whoever posted that in the Discord. But I really like the way he communicates about the science of this. It makes it very accessible in a way that I don't typically find, chemical discussions accessible.
Free, insulin is a great molecule and binds easily to insulin receptors in the body via a binding site somewhere on the thicker part of the molecule. The body then kicks into action, storing glucose into muscles and fat and slowing down the liver's production of additional glucose to reduce the blood sugar levels in the body. However, if you connect the 2 arms together, they link in such a way that they block access to insulin receptors' binding site, and insulin can no longer dock, essentially switching it off. The breakthrough idea was to attach the glucose binding molecule to one arm of insulin and to bind something similar to glucose that wasn't glucose to the other one. For this, we picked a glucoside, basically glucose plus a couple of additional atoms. This would, in theory, then do something amazing. When there is sugar in the blood supply, the glucose binding molecule will catch and release the glucose happily over and over again, and insulin will be free to function as expected. However, if sugar levels fall and there isn't anything for the glucose binding molecule to catch, even though the glucoside isn't a perfect fit, the fact that it is so close means that it will start to have weak binding interactions. These will pin the arms of glucose together, covering insulin's binding site and turning it off. Should the glucose levels rise again, glucose would start to outcompete the glucoside binding and insulin would snap open, reactivating. It was at this point of this exciting idea around 2018 when the team started to realize doing all of this alone was going to be really hard. They were very fortunate at this point to team up with...
Guys, what he just described to you is basically a smart insulin. That's so cool. That's insane. What he just described to you is self-regulating insulin.
With Novo Nordisk, one of the largest suppliers of insulin in the world, and conversations got kind of interesting, and ultimately Novo decided to purchase the company and continue the collaboration. By this point, I kind of felt like I had made the contribution that I could to this endeavor and had slightly phased myself out of the process and took a very small windfall from the event, remember, just an employee, to start helping out other scientists.
Would this potentially cure diabetes? It would basically... I don't know that it's a cure for diabetes per se, but it would basically eliminate the symptoms and progressive damage of diabetes. So the underlying damage to like your kidneys would continue to exist, is my understanding. But this would regulate the symptoms and prevent it from getting worse in a pretty revolutionary way. So you'd still have to keep taking insulin. But like between this story and the pig kidney story, we are like on the verge of basically being able to cure diabetes between these two treatments.
To turn their theory into action and started building companies with academic teams around the world. The majority of the chemistry team, though, stayed collaborating with Novo, and a couple of months ago, after 6 years of further work, they got there. Publishing again in Nature, they produced a modified insulin molecule that is able to self-regulate. Now here they decided to give it the somewhat catchy name of NNC-2215, not to be confused with NCC-2215, which obviously is the Starship Carrier USS Gentian. Pretty sure that was intentional. The very...
But like my mom lost part of her foot to diabetes. Like she's currently waiting for a kidney transplant. Like seeing stuff like this makes me want to cry, you know? Like this is hope. This is an incredible advancement. Like this is so much, if I'm being honest with you guys, this is so far beyond what I thought our technology was capable of right now.
Complicated bit that you may have spotted I entirely glanced over was getting this insulin to work in a human at physiological conditions. It needed to deactivate below a precise 4 millimolar of glucose to keep the sugar levels where we actually want them in the human body. Tuning that system is what took 6 years. To study how NNC interacts with the insulin receptor, they compared the receptor affinity for NNC to its affinity for human insulin and a current clinically used form of long-acting basal insulin. You can see here each system gives broadly similar responses when tested in the presence of 20 millimolar glucose. However, when the glucose concentrations are decreased is when interesting things start to happen. At 10 millimolar, human insulin and the basal insulin perfectly recreate the same binding behavior as at 20 millimolar, but for the NNC insulin, there is a reduction in binding strength. This trend continues at 5, 3, and 0 millimolar glucose in solution. The binding is 12.5 times weaker when glucose levels are at 0 millimolar compared to at 20 millimolar. Exactly as theorized, the team had produced the world's first insulin capable of understanding the world around it. To see how this medicine behaved in the body, the research team also ran some animal studies. In diabetic animals, they supplied them with a constant intravenous dose of glucose to simulate a meal.
It's so cool!
They then added either normal insulin in one population or NNC in another population to simulate how a diabetic injects insulin to regulate their sugar levels. They tuned the quantities of both glucose and insulin so that the blood sugar levels were held constant. Then they stopped the glucose line, simulating the end of a meal. This caused immediately the glucose levels in both populations to plummet. For the basal insulin population, their blood glucose levels dropped to a dangerous low, similar to if a diabetic patient injects too much insulin, and hit concentrations as low as 3 millimolar, hyperglycemia, where researchers immediately stepped in to restart the glucose supply to prevent damage to the animals. For the NNC insulin, glucose levels dropped rapidly, but suddenly started to plateau. At around 4.5 millimolar, the NNC insulin had automatically deactivated itself, preventing
Dude! Have you showed your mom this? I haven't yet, because like because it's not like the tech isn't quite there. Maybe I should. I've been going back and forth on it all day because like it's not attainable yet, but it's like so close. Like the fact that it auto levels out at a healthy level is incredible. It means that you do not have to, as someone with diabetes, constantly monitor your blood sugar levels, because if they're too high, you could die, and if they're too low, you could die. You know, like this is crazy. This is wild.
Further glucose absorption and keeping glucose levels within a healthy tolerance despite NNC insulin continuing to be administered. To put this in context, this would mean that diabetics would never again have to worry about accidentally over or underdosing insulin. They could administer confidently that if they got their numbers even slightly wrong, the insulin would deactivate itself to keep them safe. This, like I said, is the most advanced medicine I have ever seen. And yes, I am still biased. And just to emphasize, I have no financial or otherwise connection to this work or output. I just think it is ultra cool science. This rightfully has been echoed by several people as the culmination of thousands of years of humanity's work to produce the best diabetic treatment possible. I am incredibly proud of all of the team.
Yeah, there's a reason why cure in the title of this video is in quotes, because it doesn't cure the diabetes, but it is basically one of the biggest single advances in treatment for diabetes in decades, maybe since like the 1920s, when they figured out how to isolate insulin from like pig pancreases. You know, like this is huge.
Members that have worked on this for so many years to bring this together. The question might be, what happens next? We are clearly entering medicine 4.0. We have many other types of medicine coming to market at the moment, specifically things like cancer treatments that can do clever things like react to pH levels or temperature levels so that they only damage cancer cells and not the rest of the body. We also have awesome things that I've covered on the channel before, like this domesticated nano robot that can deliver medicine right to where it is needed within the body, like a more helpful version of the Sentinel from the Matrix. This NNC insulin needs further refinement and proving out before it is fully ready for use by human beings, but my hope is that this is firmly in its future. What does that future look like, though? To get us to
I mean, the fact that a company, we don't need to watch the rest of this. I do like, this video is fascinating. Definitely check it out if you were interested by what you saw there, but like, I mean, given the fact that one of the largest insulin manufacturers on the planet bought this startup company and this technology for $800 million, kind of indicates exactly what they think of it, I think. This is really cool. But how much will they charge for it when they finish it? I mean, my guess is they would want to charge, you know, pretty much the same. You know, maybe more at first, but they'd want to like completely swap production, I would imagine. Because it also doesn't like it's not like it removes the need for the product. It's just a better product, right? They are one of the largest manufacturers of insulin on the planet, Novo Nordisk, but they aren't the only ones. This would basically give them, you know, a global monopoly on the best kind of insulin. I imagine that they would be swapping over, and then they have like ironclad patents on it. But I imagine that because of the need for it, it's not something that they would, you know, charge, you know, tens of thousands of dollars for, but You know, it's probably something we would need people in positions of power to cap prices on. Let's put it that way. Let's put it that way. Another reason we should infiltrate the Democratic Party and seize the levers of power in this country, very specifically, so that we can cap the cost of these drugs as they come to market.